Hello, Year 5. This is today's theme lesson, learning about the Greeks. The LO is I can research the influence of the Greeks on our lives today. So we'll be looking at the things that we have got from the Greeks. So I'm just going to talk about a few things before we get there. So it says here, ancient Greece was one of humankind's greatest civilizations. They changed the world in many different ways, and their influence still lives on in many of the things we do today. So before we move on to learning about the influence that the Greeks had, I'd like you just to think about this word civilization, one of humankind's greatest civilizations. You've heard of Greek civilization, Roman civilization, ancient Egypt, that was a civilization. I just want to ask yourself, what is a civilization? You can pause the video here and you can discuss it with perhaps a parent or a sibling if anyone's around. Okay, well, a civilization, before I can explain that, I want to just go back in human history to tell you what came before civilizations. So, if you were to go back in a time machine, say 100,000 years ago, and to see how humans were living, well, humans were called hunters and gatherers. They hunted their food and they gathered their food. So they hunted animals, and they gathered fruits and vegetables from the trees and the bushes they found. And they were often nomadic, which means they would just wander around and go from place to place where there was food. Okay, so there were people that moved around, hunted for their food, and never really stuck around in many places for long. Okay, so we had hunter-gatherers, and then around 10,000 years ago something happened. We had something called agriculture came along, which is another word for farming. Okay, so people realized that, hey, look, rather than constantly hunting our food like these hunter-gatherers, what if we stayed in the same place and grew fruits and vegetables and grew them so that they'd grow again and again and again, and then we'd be able to eat them again and again and again. And likewise, they realized that if they looked after some of the animals that they hunted and kept them and bred them, then those animals would make new animals, and you could just keep some for breeding and keep others for eating. So then you've got modern farming. Okay, so when you've got modern farming, you've got plenty of food to eat, and that leaves you with more time for thinking. And when you've got more time for thinking, you can start to invent things. Okay, so about roughly 5,000 years ago, we saw the beginning of civilizations. Okay, in the Middle East, in what is now Iraq, they think is the first civilization in somewhere called ancient Mesopotamia. Soon after that, we had Egypt. What makes a civilization a civilization? What makes it different to a group of people that farm and grow crops and breed animals? Well, civilizations have things like technology. Okay, they start inventing things. You've got people with enough time on their hands to really think about making new inventions. For example, the wheel. They often start to use money. Okay, if you've got money, you can start exchanging things. You can start buying and selling. Early civilizations began writing things. People before that didn't write, so if you can write, you can record your ideas, and then people later on can learn about those ideas. And then there's art and science, so people being creative and being curious about the world around them. And so everything we know now stems from these early civilizations. So just good to be aware of what a civilization is and what humans were doing before civilizations came along. Okay, so today's lesson we're looking at some of the things that the Greeks left behind that we still use today. So did you know that many of the words we use today come from ancient Greece? So for example, the word alphabet comes from the Greek words for A and B. So alpha means A, beta means B, and that's where we get the word alphabet from. And here is an example of the Greek alphabet. Now, it should be noted here that the Greeks didn't entirely invent this, because throughout history people borrow from other people who came before them. So it was actually this group of people called the Phoenicians, who were in the Middle East, who had an early form of writing and lettering which the Greeks borrowed and adapted. After the Greeks came the Romans. They changed these letters a bit more, and they gave us what we have today in English. But you can already see many of the similarities between Greek letters and the letters we use today. What else? Greek architecture. So there's a style of architecture called neoclassical, which you still see today. So I've got here a picture of Leeds Town Hall. Now, the Greeks didn't build Leeds Town Hall. The Greeks didn't really come to England. But about 200, 150 years ago, this style of architecture became very popular. So lots of grand old buildings were built in this style. And the main feature you see here is these pillars. Okay, So that's a very Greek style. The Romans borrowed it. And then you've got some other pictures of neoclassical architecture from around the world. That's Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., which borrows from that style. The White House does as well. So it's a style of architecture we still see all over the place today. Okay, so today's lesson is a research lesson. So I want you to use the internet and books to find out about things that were invented by the Greeks that we still use today. Okay, so you could break it up into different areas. There could be English words that come from Greek, for example, alphabet, but there are plenty more. Greek inventions. There are a few things that the Greeks invented that we still use today in some form or other. And then there are ideas. The Greeks had lots of wonderful ideas, one of which is democracy, the system of voting for your leaders. But there's lots of other things that you could attribute to the Greeks. There's a video that comes on the class story which mentions some other things, so you might want to research some of those things in a bit more detail. So the way I want you to present your work, think about how you want to present it and choose one of the following. So you can make a poster. So a poster, you need a nice big bold title and you need to include pictures and words. The point of a poster is that it's nice to look at and attracts the attention of the people looking at it. You can make a PowerPoint presentation on your computer if you like. You can make a different page for each thing that you want to present and research. You could do a little non-chronological report. We've done lots of those this year, so you want to break down the text into subheadings, get some illustrations, and go into a bit of detail on certain aspects of Greek culture. Or you could create fact files. Okay, so you could research something, have a heading, and then bullet point information about that thing. Okay, now please don't just write a list of Greek inventions. That's not something that is particularly interesting. Okay, you need to say something about each thing, and your work needs to look attractive. So don't just jot down a list of things the Greeks invented. I want it to make your work look great on the page, and I want people to want to read your work. Okay, so that's today's task. I'm really looking forward to reading that. I just want to finish off with a little thought here. So we're talking about the Greeks like they invented all these things, but were the Greeks true originals? Well, the thing with civilizations is that they always borrow from somebody else. Okay, so humans are always borrowing other people's ideas. So it's worth noting here that before there were Greeks, there were other civilizations. So if you look at this part of the world here, Egypt and the Middle East, that's where the early civilizations rose up. Okay, you had the Mesopotamians in Iraq, in this area here, the ancient Egyptians, the Phoenicians. After that, you had the Greeks came along and borrowed many of the ideas from these people. And then after the Greeks, you had the Romans came along. They had a great influence on this country because they actually invaded Great Britain. And after the Romans in Europe, well, you had France and Britain and Germany began to dominate. The Vikings had a period of power, Spain. And all along during this time, there were civilizations rising up in China, in West Africa, in Central America. So, you know, civilizations have appeared everywhere, but we do seem to focus a lot on the Romans and the Greeks because they particularly had an influence on the way we think today. So it's just to bear in mind that the Greeks weren't the only peoples inventing things. They borrowed a lot from others, and there were lots of civilizations happening in other parts of the world around that time. Okay. I'll leave you with this page here. So I hope you enjoyed today's research activity. I really look forward to seeing your work. See you later. Bye.